The following program is a production of WVIZ TV Cleveland, making the difference for you.
It was very beautiful, a lot of marble, a lot of elegant golden accoutrements and ornaments and so forth, and it was just a beautiful building.
It was amazing to see how many people were out there with their little shovels trying to move the snow around.
Musicarnival was in a big tent out in Warrensville, and it was a great place for the musicals, and I really love musicals. In the summertime, that was a great thing to be taken on a date to Musicarnival.
The 30s were by far the finest decade that radio ever knew. It's my belief that if you have music, words, and sound effects, you can depict anything under the sun.
In the old days, when we wanted to visit Aunt Ida in Toledo, we didn't jump in the car and hit the turnpike like we do today. Instead, we got all dressed up and headed downtown to the elegant Cleveland Union Terminal, where a friendly redcap would carry our bags and direct us to the right track. Once upon a time, before the era of giant supermarkets, shopping for dinner meant traveling to the butcher shop, making a trip to the bakery, and then waiting for the fruit and vegetable man to come through the neighborhood with his horse-drawn cart. And it wasn't so very long ago that patriotic young men from all across Northeast Ohio joined the Army, Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard, determined to help our nation win World War II.
Well, when the Pearl Harbor was bombed, the very next day, a fairly good number of men who were probably 17 went down and enlisted, many of them in the Navy and the Marines, and that was it, and there was just an air of excitement. I was 18 at the time and had not finished high school, but I decided to leave because my brother was leaving the same day. The instructions were simple: to report to the draft board and pick up a streetcar ticket in those days and get on the streetcar on Detroit Avenue down to the public square and there report at the terminal tower, and that was the beginning of our military life. Whenever large numbers of persons were leaving for the induction center, which was often Camp Perry, Ohio, the instructions were to assemble there at that particular concourse, and the Cleveland Press took a photograph of all of the men that were leaving that day. I think there was a sense of excitement and maybe even a little sense of pride that I was going to be part of this vast war effort. And within a few days, I didn't quite feel that way. I was very homesick after the first couple of days. But that day was, I think, a day of excitement.
At home, the war effort consisted of saving everything: leather goods, rubber goods, brass, anything, scrap metals. We all saved it for the war effort.
Well, there was always a shortage of gasoline. You had to have ration stamps. And meat was rather rationed. You had to have the stamps to get meat.
No butter, obviously no pineapple. And my mother and I liked butter, so one time we took some milk and we just beat it until we got butter, you know. There was never this feeling that you moaned and groaned because you didn't have this, rather because you knew you were working. It was a concerted war effort.
To do your patriotic duty, you had to do everything to save, and so that everybody had victory gardens.
Well, it's simply a garden you planted in your backyard to raise produce for yourself and make foodstuff available to go out to the armed forces.
They had to have money to finance the military operations and pay the men that they were drafting. So they had bond rallies. I particularly remember the bond rallies because they war bonds that helped finance the war. And I just feel that this really occupied an important part of my life, as it did anyone my age, because we were all involved. It was so much different from subsequent wars that I have experienced, because we all felt that we had something really to fight for.
The women themselves, they spend a lot of time and a lot of effort during the war.
Most of us went to work in war plants. I worked for Cleveland Diesel at the time. My mother went into a war plant, and women were working that had never worked in places like that. They never done this kind of thing.
My mother, who professionally was a hat maker, she was drafted into getting a job as Rosie the Riveter. Well, that's what they called the working women in those days. So she went to work every night. Her shift started at 11 o'clock. She came home at 7 o'clock in the morning. She had to get us off to school, and she had to prepare a meal for the night so that she could sleep during the day and get ready for work. And it was pretty trying times for her. And of course, she had her son in the service, and we didn't know where he was.
And they put a card in the window of the house showing a star. If it was a blue star, I think it had a red border, that meant you had a serviceman in your family. But if it had a gold star, it meant that if you were a Gold Star mother, it meant you lost a son.
Soldiers reigned supreme in the war, and when they would come home, they were welcomed with open arms.
It was about 8 months after I left that I was home on a leave of absence, and it was in November of 1943, in the Thanksgiving Christmas season. If I remember, there was a great deal of recognition and appreciation of servicemen by Clevelanders. There was a friendliness and an openness, and what can we do for you? And it was a wonderful feeling to know that the country was so unified and appreciated the people who were to take part in this war.
The general mood, I thought, was very concerned and giving and caring and very upbeat.
And I remember when the word came out that the war was over, and we were jumping around, dancing and celebrating. There's 4 of us or 5 of us there. And even my mother got into the spirit of things, and she was more low profile. But because the war was over, everybody was jubilant. And it was a time where there was absolute jubilation.
Remember when, during World War II, butter, milk, and eggs were hard to come by, and people made war cake? Here's the recipe. Mix together 2 cups of brown sugar, 2 cups of hot water, 2 teaspoons of lard, a package of raisins, and a teaspoon each of salt, cinnamon, and cloves. Boil for 5 minutes. When the mixture cools, add 3 cups of flour and 1 teaspoon of baking soda dissolved in hot water. Bake in a greased tube pan for about an hour at 350 degrees. By the way, this nostalgic confection was also known as a victory cake.
You tend to think of things that happened when you were a kid as far greater than they really were. But I swear that this is true. There was no donut made in the city of Cleveland then or now that would compare to a Spang's glazed donut. I've had a lot of donuts in my life, but I have never had a donut as fresh, delicious, or soft as these were. They were just spectacular.
In Spang Bakery, I remember the bakery wagons going by. They were driven by horses, so you had to be very careful if you walked behind the horses. Otherwise, you might have a problem. But they would deliver all these fresh baked goods to your home. And you put up a sign in your home when you wanted the Spang Bakery wagon to stop.
Spang's Bakery also sponsored the popular Gene and Glenn radio show on WTAM. So as part of the program, the 2 celebrities would tell their listeners about Spang's specials, like bread for only 12 cents a loaf.
12 cents a loaf? 12 cents a loaf, that's all it was. You would have a special bread delivered to your home.
It wasn't so very long ago when fresh, delicious foods were delivered right to your front door. Think back to the days when you'd run out to meet the fruit and vegetable man as he wound his way through the neighborhood on a warm, sunny afternoon.
Yeah, those are nice memories from the summer months. We used to have the huckster, as we called him. He'd come in this, I think it was an old Dodge truck, it was a long truck, and he had like slanted like a bin, I guess you could call it a bin on the side, and he would have the vegetables, the fruit, and he had his scale hanging, and you could go out and you could buy 1 apple, 3 apples, whatever it is that you wanted, and whatever vegetable. Now this was only in the summer. He didn't come in the wintertime. It was only in the summer he would be on the street.
We had horse delivery of ice and horse delivery of milk. And I know when the producers went from the horses to the motorized, the driver was telling me it took him longer to do the route because the horse would go to his next stop and he'd just catch up with it. And the truck won't do that.
And it wasn't just food vendors that would steer their horses down Cleveland streets. The paper rags man was also a frequent visitor to many Northeast Ohio neighborhoods.
I remember the Paper X man. I liked him. He used to have good things on his truck. He'd have all these things in his truck. Kids are looking, you know, look at the good stuff he's got in the truck there. But it was his.
Oh, yes. He was this wonderful man that came with this rickety wagon with the horse that go clop. We had brick streets that go cloppity-clop on the street, and he'd go, Paper X, Paper X. And that meant, which we now have figured out, paper and rags, and he would pay you money. Not a big quantity, but he would pay you money for that. Now we recycle, then they paid for it.
Remember when you could buy a brand new 2-tone car complete with a radio and automatic transmission for about $2,000? Well, in 1953, that was the going rate for a Ford right here in Cleveland. For an even better deal, go back a generation to 1931. That's when a Ford dealer out on Buckeye Road was selling the new Model A for a mere $700. And how much were those Model Ts that rolled off the assembly line way back in 1916? Believe it or not, you could pick one up for $450.90. Incidentally, that price included a 25-cent charge for 2 gallons of gasoline. My, how times have changed. Aboard!
WWII station was something else. It was really a grand place. First time you walked in there, whether you were 12 or 32, it was just enough to mesmerize you. Living in a plain neighborhood and going down and seeing something of this magnificence was, in my opinion, beyond my wildest comprehension. It was more than I could even take in at one time.
Magnificent, beautiful, awe-inspiring. These are words that come to mind when we think back to the glory days of train travel and the old Cleveland Union Terminal. It was part of the Terminal Tower Complex, Cleveland's largest construction project of the 1920s, and the grand opening of the train station on June 29, 1930, was a day of celebration for all of Northeast Ohio.
The terminal tower, when it was being built, created a lot of excitement downtown. People would stand and just watch it going up and watch the structure as it developed and so forth. As it became completed, it was very beautiful. A lot of marble, a lot of elegant golden accoutrements and ornaments and so forth, and it was just a beautiful building.
The Cleveland Union Terminal saw its last passenger train on January 14, 1977, and the railway station has since been converted into Tower City Center. But local transportation historian Blaine Hayes recalls the station's bustling energy of the 1930s and 1940s.
You came down to the station with your suitcases. There was a red cap. A very famous railroad memory are the red caps, and they actually had little red caps that would come and take your baggage and carry it for you all the way to the train level. They would check it, help you check it in. You would come in the front into the beautiful portico in the front, which has not changed at all. It's exactly the same as it was in the days of the station.
From the portico, you went down a ramp to the concourse level, where you would buy your tickets. That ramp has been replaced by a level floor today, but the ceiling, with its wonderful hand-painted flowers, still slopes down as a reminder of what used to be.
Went over to the ticket room, which was this huge area right behind me. It was the ticket area, and on the first floor, instead of the little shops that are there today, these were all brass ticket windows. They were lined up, and then you would go over to your gate, and they had gates that were made of brass, and the gates would close, and at train time they would open the gates, and then everybody that was lined up would walk down the stairs to the platform level, and those gates, the train gates, are now a part of this railing which goes around the Tower City, and you can see these gates, and they are the architecture of those gates, the style, the design of those gates is well remembered by Clevelanders.
When you got down to the platform level, the conductor would put down a little stool and help you board the train. Then it was a short ride to either Collinwood or Lyndale.
The steam locomotives that were popular in those days were not used inside this building. There was a ban on steam locomotives because they did not want the smoke to come up through the entryways into the station. They wanted this to be a pristine operation. So as part of the construction of the terminal, they built an electric railroad. This was a real sophisticated, just like New York and Chicago and the big cities. We had an electric railroad from Collinwood on the east side to Lyndale on the southwest side that pulled the passenger trains from those locations. They changed from the steam to the electric, pulled them into the terminal, and then pulled them out to the other side, and then they would change from electric back to steam.
Train travel was elegant. You did eat off of a tablecloth, off of beautiful china and with silverware, and cloth napkins, and the waiters were very elegant too, extremely polite, and the whole thing just was a nice experience.
Going to the train station was a special event. You actually got dressed up to go to the train station to either get on the train or to meet people that you were picking up from the train.
There was a lot of traffic going through there of people who maybe didn't know exactly what they wanted to do with their evening, so they'd walk through the terminal tower, look at the rather fancy shops that there were, stop at Fred Harvey's for a sundae or some other kind of snack.
Fred Harvey's was a famous railroad restaurant chain with several eateries inside the Cleveland Union Terminal, from casual lunch counters to the very formal English Oak Room.
The Oak Room was a very, very special restaurant in the terminal tower. It was a place where you went when you really wanted to have an elegant meal in elegant surroundings. The women who worked there were the Harvey, I think they're called the Harvey women or Harvey girls. Not sure if the word girls was used in those days or not. But in any event, they were very, very handsome ladies who were very efficient and did a wonderful job of serving. And the food featured the very finest of meats and fish, served in a very elegant way. I can remember being there, and because it was very close to the area where the trains went rumbling through on their way to Chicago, New York, and all over, you could often feel the vibrations. And sitting in those elegant chairs with the arms on both sides, and you could feel your whole body vibrating gently, as though you were in a very gentle massage area, but it was very, very fitting.
The Cleveland Union Terminal was at its busiest during the Second World War, when it was witness to a wide range of human emotions.
I think the most sentimental time in its history was during World War II, because a lot of the soldiers who were departing and coming in would come through there. They'd be greeted by their sweethearts, and let's say they'd be saying goodbye to families and all of that, and it just had an atmosphere of love and sentimentality.
My most vivid memory of the Cleveland Union Terminal is a very personal and poignant one, because during World War II, in 1942, I had enlisted in the U.S. Coast Guard, and I was transferred from the Cleveland area to the Coast Guard headquarters in Seattle, Washington. The only way to get there was by train. I was put in charge of a detail of a half a dozen Coast Guardsmen who were to be transferred to Seattle. I'll never forget my father coming down with me to the terminal tower and putting his arms around me and kissing me goodbye, because one didn't know where I was going to wind up, or South Pacific or wherever, and tears in his eyes, and I guess some tears in my eyes, as he said goodbye to me at the Cleveland Terminal Tower during the early 1940s.
Well, the big snow of 1950 was an event which, as the older we get, the bigger the snow it was. But what I recall about it was looking out our back window, looking toward the east, and the window was about 4 feet off the ground, and part of the window pane was covered with snow. And it was absolutely beautiful.
It was Friday, November 24th, 1950, the day after Thanksgiving. A low-pressure system moved from Virginia into Ohio, causing a 5-day storm that dumped 22 inches of snow on northeast Ohio. The airport closed, the Cleveland Press wasn't published, and the entire city came to a grinding halt.
We had Euclid Avenue, our main street, was virtually deadlocked. Streetcars were absolutely stalled for blocks and blocks and blocks through the middle of the streets. Then you had broken down trucks and automobiles on the curbs in the street. And what few vehicles could get through were dodging in and out, weaving in and out of these things to get down to where they could continue to plow.
I got downtown, I was still the first one on the job, and it was scary. That night I stayed at the Cleveland Hotel, the old Cleveland Hotel. We didn't go home. The company put us up.
They had teams of young kids and older people that were just shoveling the streets so that cars could get through. It was amazing to see how many people were out there with their little shovels trying to move the snow around.
I remember that. Our daughter was about a year old, and I walked for a couple of miles through heavy drifts just to buy some milk for her. It was probably the biggest snowstorm, because they had tanks coming into the city to clear the roads. The drifts were really high. It paralyzed the city.
By Sunday, November 26th, Cleveland Mayor Thomas Burke declared a state of emergency, and the National Guard was called in to help clear the city's streets. Area schools were closed for the next week, as were many local businesses. But by the following Saturday, life got back to normal as the temperature hit 53 degrees. When it was all said and done, the big snow of 1950 cost the city of Cleveland more than $1 million.
But it was, at the time and in retrospect, one of the most exciting things that anyone could experience, because it wasn't tragic. It was just an event.
Remember when important messages were sent not by fax machines and computers, but by telegrams?
Telegrams were very popular at that time, and they had Western Union working the boats on 9th Street Pier. They had messenger boys working in the terminal tower for when the trains came in there. That was very busy for train travel at one time. And people sent telegrams and received them. I know every Sunday morning I left the East 9th Street office, no matter what the weather was. It could be 6 inches of snow, and my route was from there to Brecksville. And sometimes be gone most of the day with a route like that. But no matter how cold it was or how rainy it was, we went.
Once upon a time, in the days of root cellars and ice boxes, keeping a family fed was almost a full-time job.
Women did the shopping, and they probably shopped every afternoon. And they prepared their meals on the basis of what they intended to buy that day. So there was none of this huge cart of food, hanging over the cart. They could plan their menu, and first of all, they would stop in a butcher's shop, and this is all they did was sell meat in the butcher's shop. And the one I remember had sawdust on the floor and had a big cooler. I still remember the butcher going into the cooler, coming out with a huge slab of meat and sawing it in front of you.
After you bought your meat for the day, it was on to the grocery store. Now, this wasn't a modern supermarket with everything from kiwi fruit to frozen yogurt. No, in the old days, when you went to the grocery store, you ordered your beans, cereal, and flour from a clerk behind a counter.
And then after your purchase was completed, he'd pull the pencil out from behind his ear, tabulate your bill, and that was it.
Lots of bakeries, no franchises. Every bakery was a family. And you went in there, and if you were a steady customer, you got a little bit extra. And so that was wonderful.
And it was a matter of going from one place to another to make your purchases for that day. It also meant that you met your neighbors. And this is where the little conversations would take place. And most of that was done on a daily basis by the women.
A favorite shopping area for many Clevelanders was the old Central Market.
My mother was quite a walker. We lived around West 58 Lorraine, and when the Lorraine-Carnegie Bridge was completed, she would make the trip across that bridge and buy items in the Central Market. I think the reason for that, there were a number of Italian merchants. One of them is still here, Gus Gallucci. Gallucci was present in the Central Market in those days, and there you could buy your Italian items.
Where the present-day ballpark is where Gallucci's was. And we knew that Gallucci's would have something good to eat. Now, there's no pizza houses, no spaghetti, nothing. I walked like 4 or 5 blocks, and I'm into this big teeming area. There are hundreds of people walking down Market Stand. There's people screaming and yelling, hawking their wares. And I walk into Gallucci's, and there's all kinds of smells. Remember, no refrigeration. There's no refrigeration whatsoever, just the ice and ice boxes so the smells are all exotic and strange, and the store is busy. There's all kinds of cheese hanging, round cheese, long cheese, and all kinds of people talking strange languages.
You could have a sense of being in a European Congress, and everybody speaking in their own tongue. The Central Market differed a bit from the West Side Market. The Central Market was a bit more sprawled out. But I also remember both markets had merchants that had their wares out on the sidewalk. But we did have 2 very interesting markets at that time. And now, of course, Central Market is the Gund Arena and a baseball field.
The Central Market building was destroyed by a fire on December 17, 1949. But it lives on in our memories. So do the old 5 and dime stores. Remember the days when you could go into Woolworth's and buy just about anything in the store for a mere 10 cents?
Woolworth's was on the corner of 4th and Euclid. And it had 2 levels, and the floors were wooden. And there was a woman who there'd be a piano there, and if you wanted a piece of sheet music, popular music, you take it over to her and she'd play it for you. And if you liked it, you bought it. So I think that's kind of different. You didn't have anything like that today. We go buy records and CDs and so forth, and you buy what you get. You can't play it first. But those days, why, you could do this.
And back in the old days, an illness in the family usually meant a trip not to the local doctor's office, but to the local drugstore.
The drugstores were, in reality, drugstores. You could not buy lawnmowers or anything else. And the druggist was usually the local doctor. not too many people could afford to have their own personal doctor. So often they would visit the drugstore and say, I have this condition, I have this inflammation, and the druggist would be expected to come up with some kind of a solution for your problem. Probably the only thing that was added to the drugstore was the soda fountain, which had little chairs, and I think that's where the term soda jerk originated, because the person on the other side of the counter would mix up the sundaes, milkshakes, and sodas. Drugstores were wonderful places.
Remember when $3.99 would get you a rugged men's gabardine jacket? Or a cool, crease-resistant rayon dress at the Halle Brothers department store? Remember when Higbee's promised foam cushioned comfort from heel to toe in its stylish Dream Step casual shoes for only $2.98 a pair? Think back to the 1950s. That's when these ads all appeared in Cleveland's newspapers. And who can forget this television commercial?
You haven't seen Higbee's today. You haven't seen Higbee's.
Well, Alpine Village was kind of exclusive, and that was really stepping up.
It was a restaurant which brought in top-name entertainment.
I'd say it was one of my top favorite restaurants and nightclubs of all the ones I remember downtown.
When folks look back at some of their favorite Cleveland dining spots, there's one name that comes up over and over again, and that's Herman Perchner's Alpine Village. This popular restaurant and nightclub opened in 1934 at 1614 Euclid Avenue. And for the next 3 decades, it was the place to go to celebrate a birthday, anniversary, or other special occasion.
The high school kids, they had a prom, and they used to have them at the hotels downtown, and to take your girlfriend or your date to Alpine Village was always a mark that you were really a gentleman to Alpine Village. They had entertainment there, and it was a place of good food.
I have a menu from 1961, I think it was, and the highest price meat dish was $5 or $5 1/4. And I have another menu that goes back to 1940 when the neighbors took my sister out before she was leaving home for the convent. They featured Boston strip steak for $2. That was the highest price thing on the menu. And Wiener Schnitzel was $1.10. Then if you got side dishes, vegetables were like 25 cents, and your dessert, like pies, were 25 cents.
They also had the El Dorado room, which was kind of a semi-private room above the Alpine Village, and you could kind of go step out into a balcony and see what was going on down below and still have a nice evening at the El Dorado Club.
Like the Alpine Village, Stouffer's was a popular spot for special occasions. Both the downtown Stouffer's and the one at Shaker Square offered outstanding food and top-notch service. So did Gruber's, located on Van Aken Boulevard in Shaker Heights.
Gruber's was probably the most elegant East Side restaurant in Greater Cleveland. You had to wear a tie to go in there, and the food was really elegant. The one exception it made to people who had to wear a tie was a man named Bill Veck. Bill Veck was one of the owners of the Cleveland Indians, the days of Lou Boudreau and Luke Easter and Larry Doby and Earl Averill and those legendary baseball figures. He had a table in the rear of Gruber's where he and his friends, mainly in the media and the sports area and the theatrical area, would join him for dinner. And he would never wear a tie, no matter where he went. He only wore a white sports shirt, which was open at the collar, and a blue jacket. Never wore a tie, and he was permitted to come to Gruber's, only one, without a tie. Everybody else, they had some ties there. If you didn't wear a tie, they'd give you a tie when you came in. but you had to have a tie and a jacket, but not Bill Veck.
Yes, Cleveland offered a wealth of fine dining experiences. And if you were in the mood for a more casual meal, you still had plenty of terrific restaurants to choose from.
Clark's was a big restaurant. I think it was a chain. When I was romancing my wife in the 1950s, we used to go to one of the shows, either State or the Palace or Stillwell, or one of those shows downtown, or the Allen. And right in the midst of these shows was Clark's Theater, Clark's Restaurant. And I'd take her there for, I don't know, I think we had a piece of pie, and I had about $2 in my pocket. Whatever I had, we had a piece of apple pie with some ice cream and a cup of cocoa, and I think the bill came about $1.75, and I was within my budget.
There were about 20 Clark's restaurants here in Northeast Ohio, but Clark's reputation spread halfway around the world, as prominent Cleveland restaurateur Vernon Stouffer found out on a trip to Europe.
He was doing some hunting in Scotland in the late 30s when he came across, believe it or not, a match cover of Clark's, Cleveland Clark's restaurant. He was a friend of Mr. Clark, and he sent back the match cover along with a letter to Mr. Clark about discovering this match cover of Clark's in Scotland, of all places. And Mr. Clark was so impressed with the whole coincidence of it that his competitor would do that he printed a photocopy of the match cover and the letter from Vernon Stouffer, put it on the back of the Clark's menu.
Then there were those terrific cafeterias like Mills, the Blue Boar, and the Forum, where the slogan during the 1930s was, "If you have all your meals here at the Forum, you'll save $104, which was a real pile of money during the Depression. Years later, in the 1950s, casual dining sometimes meant enjoying a meal in the car at a new kind of restaurant called a drive-in.
As I recall, what is now the corner intersection of Warrensville, Northfield, and Chagrin, there was a Manners Big Boy, which was one of the first fast food hamburger joints in this area, in my memory. And it was, again, a ritual, a tradition, where after the football or the basketball game, you piled into the cars and you drove up there. And in the early days, you still could get waited on, where they put took your order from the car, and then they would bring your food out on the tray, and you put it on the window ledge of the car. And you would just have a grand time continuing from the excitement of the football or the basketball game.
And who can forget those wonderful old-fashioned ice cream parlors?
Hoffman's Ice Cream was located someplace in the downtown area, and they were considered the best ice cream spot in the city. People would stop there after theater and have some ice cream of some kind. They had the banana splits and the malts, and it was a very popular place.
Well, it was a wonderful little spot to stop for a Sunday, and that was my mother's refuge. When things got upsetting to her at home, she'd take off, get on the bus, and go downtown and have a Sunday at Hoffman's, and she would return, everything was okay again. The pressures were gone, and that was her tonic.
And also there was one downtown across from what is now Playhouse Square. It was called Bouquets. And theirs, when they were served, were awesome. They were in a 12-inch square dish, I think just as high. It was almost more ice cream that I could eat, and I like to eat ice cream. They were really fat, lots of whipped cream and nuts and cherries and all that stuff on it. Excellent.
And often some of these places had a jukebox, and you could spend part of the evening there just enjoying a Sunday and listening to Glenn Miller or somebody. It was a good place to have a date.
It was, well, for lack of a better analogy, it was like a huge carousel, with the covered top and then the arena seats and then the theater in the round.
And it was kind of close and congenial. You sat in kind of a circus atmosphere. It was a tent.
And it was a great place for the musicals. I really love musicals.
They also brought in live entertainment. That's where my daughter and I recall seeing the Jackson 5 for the first time and Gladys Knight. And there were so many others that would come in. This was during the summer, and we would try to get there as often as we could, because in those days it was unique. Theater in the round, outdoor, and it was much like going, to a picnic, if you will, because it was informal, and you had to squish people around, and you got up close and personal with them, and everybody got into the acts, that were going on.
Musicarnival opened in the summer of 1954 and was one of the first tent theaters in the nation. It was located next to Thistledown Racetrack in Warrensville Heights. The original producer and director of Musicarnival Productions was John L. Price.
We were the only professional musical show in town. And as a result, because of the fact that if there was one thing that I was able to do was to cast. I had a lot of other things I couldn't do, but by golly, I knew how to get the good ones. And I did. I mean, we'd have Beverly Sills a month at a time, year after year after year. It'd been, at the time, they'd say, Beverly who? Well, they don't say Beverly who anymore.
Yes, there were some terrific operas staged at Musicarnival, but the theater was perhaps best known for its original productions of popular Broadway musicals. Frank Brooks was a Musicarnival performer in the early 1960s.
We had to not only just do singing or dancing, we had to sing, dance, and act. And I was there for 2 seasons. Suffered through summer shock, shall we say, for 2 seasons. You want to know what summer shock is? Well, you see, the shows ran for 2 weeks. And once you opened the show, then you started rehearsals for the next show. Then the second week the show was running, and the second week you were rehearsing for the show to follow the show you were doing. You started in the morning musical rehearsals for the third show. And summer shock came about probably early part of August. And at that point, after several weeks of this, rehearsing 2 shows and doing 1 show, you would kind of wander into the dressing room and just sit down and say, what show are we doing?
In addition to summer shock, the actors sometimes had to deal with the unique challenges of performing in an open-air theater.
The Warrensville Heights Fire Department and Police Department were literally next door. And one time when Martha Ray was on stage, there was a fire call, and of course all these fire trucks and emergency vehicles and police cars with all their sirens screaming away went zooming past the theater. But Miss Ray, it didn't faze Miss Ray at all. She just got up there and said, don't worry folks, I got a big mouth, you can still hear me. You kind of had to learn a lot about theater real quickly, how to get your audience's attention and hold it, because there were all these attractions with the racetrack. They were exercising horses. When we'd start the show at night. There was the traffic noises. And then, of course, the rain coming.
Yes, the Musicarnival tent was susceptible to the whims of Mother Nature, but it also helped create a relaxed and friendly atmosphere for the audience. And so did the grounds surrounding the theater.
John had set this theater in his old farm. There was an orchard behind the old farmhouse, which was his office. He had picnic tables set in there, and families and groups would come in and have a sort of a picnic supper there and then go in to see the show. And you had more of an intimate feeling. It was more like you were inviting the audience to have fun with you, with the play.
Fun and laughter, great music, and great entertainment. That's what Musicarnival was all about. And even though it closed in 1975, Musicarnival producer John L. Price hopes that greater Clevelanders are still touched by the magic of 21 seasons of outstanding performances at this very special theater.
I just hope they remember that we gave them a good show and they had a good time. And that's really the name of the game.
Remember when, in the days before VCRs and home computers, kids entertained themselves by building their own crystal set radios?
Everybody had radios, and I even had a crystal set, you know. I used my bed spring for an aerial and listen to that sometimes. Something that, you know, a lot of kids made these crystal sets, you know, that's what we did. Yeah.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
NBC in Cleveland, your station is WTAM.
This little tune by Richard Heyman I think you might like, called Huckleberry Finn.
50 years ago, if you would have dropped in on almost any Northeast Ohio family on a Sunday evening, this is what you would have seen. People gathered around a big console radio.
Radio was the main form of household entertainment. This was before the era of TVs, of course. If a certain program came on at a certain time, on a certain night, then everybody made sure that the dishes were done and that we were all gathered around the radio to listen, you know, to our favorite stories.
Well, there was no television, so we had no choice. We wanted to get the outside world coming in verbally to listen to the radio. But then there were some wonderful radio stations in Cleveland and wonderful persons who had regular programs. One couple was two men named Gene and Glenn.
Gene and Glenn were Gene Carroll and Glenn Rowell, and they were two of the biggest radio stars ever to hit the Cleveland airwaves. Their daily program ran on WTAM from 1930 to 1935 and was also heard across the nation on the NBC radio network. Gene Carroll also created two characters called Jake and Lena, and he did their voices so well that most listeners believed they were real people.
Oh, Jake! Here I am, Dowsy Wowsy. Dowsy Wowsy. Dowsy Wowsy, at you, baby.
One day, Jake was supposed to marry Lena in an on-air ceremony. Well, fans of the show dropped off wedding gifts for the happy couple at the WTAM studios. And when Jake jilted Lena at the altar, listeners called the station for weeks asking where Jake had gone and offering their condolences to Lena. Many listeners never did figure out that Jake and Lena were fictional characters. People were also fooled by a program called The Waltz Palace, a fictional ballroom on the shores of Lake Erie created by local radio legend Wayne Mack.
Good evening, everybody. This is Wayne Mack greeting you again from the balcony radio box here at the Waltz Palace, overlooking the great glistening dance floor and the huge stage just below it. The famous Waltz Palace, Northern Ohio's oldest, most beautiful ballroom, is situated on wide landscaped grounds right along the lake, some 22 miles outside of town on picturesque Sunset Road with this area's most beautiful view. Come out tonight if you can.
He is able by his verbalization skills to make you think as a listener that you are right there, that this is actually taking place. And I sometimes used to wonder myself in the 40s and 50s, did these concerts really take place? Was it for real? Because Wayne Mack could describe it very, very beautifully and very articulately.
If you have music, words, and sound effects, you can depict anything under the sun. You don't need anything else. Words, music, and sound effects. And radio can do that. Radio can create a palace that TV can never match. Never.
Wayne Mack's Waltz Palace existed only in the imagination. But in the 1940s, there were plenty of music programs that were broadcast from real dance floors in the Cleveland area. Charles Day, a newsman at WGAR Radio from 1943 to 1971, recalls the days of these remote broadcasts.
The stations would carry live dance orchestras playing from the hotels because in those days, the hotel dining rooms had orchestras playing. Go have dinner and dance.
In addition to broadcasting the music of local dance bands, many Cleveland radio stations used to have their own orchestras. Remember Johnny Andrews and the Morning Bandwagon Show? It ran weekdays from 7 to 9 a.m. on WTAM from 1952 to 1956, and it featured a live 17-piece orchestra. Here's a sample of their work.
Henry, you ready?
Yeah.
Well, we're ready, so let's go with the Dixieland Band, the Golden Trumpet, and the Muscat Ramble.
Like Johnny Andrews, Bill Smoochie Gordon was a popular radio personality in the 1950s, and he's still on the air today. He remembers the days when big stars would drop by his radio show.
Oh, I had some great interviews. I had Victor Borga. Remember Victor Borga? He was fantastic. He was supposed to be on for like 3 minutes, and he could not do anything because he was here under the aegis of some other big deal. And he saw the piano in the studio. I said, I know you can't play the piano because it's against the musicians. He said, oh, I play the piano if I want to. I said, well, you probably don't want it. It went on. He stayed for an hour and a half and played the piano, did his whole concert on my show, caused a sensation. So we had a lot of good times on radio, live radio. Freedom of thought, freedom of entertainment, trying to be entertaining and informative at the same time.
In the 1950s, the sound of radio was changed forever when stations here in Cleveland and around the nation introduced a new kind of announcer called a disc jockey, or DJ. And Cleveland DJ Alan Freed became one of the biggest names in broadcasting when he coined the term rock and roll. Here's Alan Freed and his Moondog Show.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Moondog Rock and Roll Party. Another big Tuesday night rock and roll get-together with all the gang in the Moondog Kingdom. And away we go with Gil Bernal, picking up that tenor horn to blow it strong, and the Spark label and the whip. Hey, here we go.
Yes, Clevelanders have always loved their music, but they love their sports just as much. And in the early days of radio, the king of sports broadcasting was the old redhead with the megaphone, Tom Manning.
Let's briefly recap this exciting Cleveland first inning for you. Charlie Jameson led off against Burley Grimes with a line drive that was good for a single. Bill Wamby followed with another. Jamie stopped at second.
He had a special enthusiasm and ebullience about his voice that made it very contagious. And even if it only was a pop fly that was caught behind second base, he made it sound like it could have been a hit over to center field bleachers because the way he described something.
That ball is going. It's going for a home run. A bases loaded home run. Oh, Smith has just smashed the first bases loaded home run in World Series history. Listen to that crowd there going wild.
1948 was a great year. The Indians were doing everything right. The plain dealer or the press would put the baseball story out on page 1 very frequently, not just on page 1 of the sports section. And baseball was big news because the Indians were winning. And at the same time, the Cleveland Browns started in 1946 under Paul Brown, and they were big winners. So, and then in 1948, the hockey team, the Cleveland Barons, playing at the old arena, won their championship. And so for the end of 48 and all through 49, we kept calling ourselves Cleveland, the City of Champions.
1948 was indeed Cleveland's championship season, a season like no other in the city's history. We saw the American Hockey League Barons go undefeated for 30 straight games en route to the Calder Cup trophy. We cheered on the first modern pro football team to go unbeaten as the Browns won the league championship in the All-American Football Conference. And we thrilled to one of the great pennant races in baseball history as the Indians beat the Boston Braves in the World Series.
When the Indians were real hot in 1948 and we would go to the games, they used to have 70,000, 80,000 people. I remember it was mobs.
When the Indians won the pennant in 48, I drove my mother crazy with the radio on, but I think everyone, we lived on a street that had maybe 25 houses and you never missed one beat of the whole ball game. You could start at Broadview and walk all the way down to our home and everyone had the radio on. All the doors were open. You could hear everything that happened from each inning to inning to inning. It was really very exciting that everybody was so excited about it.
As Cleveland wins the second World Series game by a score of 4-1 to draw up on equal terms with the Boston Braves.
One of the things that I really liked was back in the late 40s, they had a promotion during the summertime where if an adult brought a child to a game under 12, that they would buy one ticket and another person would be allowed to come in. So we'd stand around gate A and we'd look for people coming to the game that were alone, and they were approachable. I would say, "Hey, mister, could you take us into the game with you?" And some of them say, "Sure, son, come on." And they'd take us in. Sometimes they'd even buy us some peanuts or something like that. And we'd sit with the guy, a total stranger, and watch the baseball game. And then after a few innings, we'd aggregate, we'd meet behind home plate somewhere, and then we'd go on our merry way. And but I tell my wife about that. Can you imagine today a kid 10 years old going out to Jacobs Field and going up to a total stranger and asking to escort you into the game? You know, the life has changed completely.
Remember what it was like growing up in Cleveland?
It was a wonderful place to grow up. It really was. My children will not know all the warm, kind things that happen among neighbors, you know, helping neighbors, doing things with neighbors. They don't do that anymore nowadays. You're lucky if you see your neighbors.
Well, I think Cleveland is an excellent place to live. I think that people that grew up in our era of Cleveland, it's a small, big town.
Growing up was hard in a lot of aspects, but we didn't realize it back then. You know, maybe we didn't have the most fashionable clothing at times, or the most up-to-date whatever, but we never knew that. You know, our parents, they worked hard and gave us what they could, and we didn't look for something more. It was what it was.
This program was a production of WVIZ-TV Cleveland, making the difference for you.